Yeah, let me introduce you our guest's company called Mediocre. Mediocre? How to spell? Okay, and they tell us about their game or games. I don't know. Just okay. I give you the word, and you just start and feel yourself comfortable and just tell us something. And I'll try to bring people out of there.
Thank you. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Henrik Johansson and this is my colleague Dennis Gustafsson and we are Mediocre. We're going to talk about the development of our first game. It's called Sprinlke. It was released back in August of 2011 and it was originally only available for Android and iOS, but now for several other platforms as well. Has anybody here seen or played Sprinlke before? Yeah? Cool. Well, for those who haven't seen it, we thought we'd begin by showing you the release trailer. There's supposed to be sound. So that's Sprinlke, and that was actually our first game that we developed together, and we've been doing a few other things since then. But Dennis and I, we met early in the early 90s when we were in school, and we were trying to develop games back then as well, but it was a different market, and we were too inexperienced and too young, I think, to actually manage to do something complete. So we went on our separate careers. And I worked in graphic design for roughly 10 years, and then, well, Dennis, why don't you tell us about your background?
So I'm Dennis Gustafsson, and I've been working with games for about 10 years, and mostly on tools and middleware, and more specifically on game physics simulation. Started a company in Sweden about 10 years ago that did called Micon, and we did physics simulation for games. And then I've also worked with performance profiling and some contract work for different developers. And the project started about 2 years ago when I took some time off to experiment with old ideas I had. When I worked with physics, there was a lot of ideas and never got the time to explore. So taking some time off, it was a good opportunity to try out some of those ideas. And one of them was fluid. So here we see an old movie of some of those experiments. This is in 3D, obviously. Usually in games, you use a technique called SPH. It's a particle-based simulation, and it's good for effects and for just adding visual splashes and stuff like that, but it doesn't really cope well with stable interaction with other objects and gameplay physics. So I tried a different method, and this one, as you can see, it interacts pretty nicely with rigid bodies. There's a nice two-way coupling. The bodies affect the water, and the water affects the bodies. And an even more complex example here with some cloth added to the mix, and they all three interact with each other. And this is what inspired us to play with the idea of using fluid as kind of the main element of gameplay instead of just effects, as typical is in games. So our that experiment was, of course, not running in real time, even on a fast desktop machine. That was just too complicated to run. So we knew we had to do some simplifications to make this run, especially on a small mobile phone or tablet computer. But our idea was to make a casual game, because we're not hardcore gamers ourselves. We actually don't play a lot of games. So we wanted to make a simple game that anyone could play. We targeted tablets as kind of the main format for this game. This was around the time when the iPad 1 was released in the US, and we were kind of intrigued by the format. We'd never been that interested in games for mobile phones, actually. We thought the screen size was very small and the touch area was very small, and we didn't even try out the game on a mobile phone until the very end of the project, and then we were kind of surprised that it worked really well, so we released on both phones and tablets. We chose to base the game on a cutting-edge fluid simulation, a kind of advanced technology, and that was a conscious decision to use a lot of high-end technology in a game to put a barrier to the competition. I think it worked pretty well. We haven't seen a lot of competitors or similar games to Sprinlke, because the fluid is not that easy to do. We also decided to make a non-violent and family-friendly game. I think this also was a good decision in the end, because it attracts a lot of hardware vendors. When they want to showcase some piece of hardware, they're usually looking for non-offensive games that can appeal to anyone. And we also took the decision to not have any text in the game. That was mostly just because we were lazy and didn't want to do localization, but I think it also turned out pretty well in the end, since it had this mass appeal. It can appeal to someone who doesn't even know how to read. When we released the game, the only word in the game was actually Sprinlke. The rest was just symbols and images.
Alright, so having decided on making a game based on this fluid simulation, we experimented with a lot of different ideas, nothing that really resembled Sprinlke for at least the first few months. And we kind of wanted to make something that would be like a tilt-controlled fluid labyrinth with movable obstacles. However, our first attempts really proved to be extremely difficult to design levels for, and it didn't have a lot of entertainment value. People thought it was fun to look at, but didn't really enjoy playing it. So we tried to introduce many different new things, like deadly sensors, and change the fluid dynamics, the fluid controls into a fixed water cannon instead. However, the most challenging problem we had was simply because of the low performance on mobile devices at the time. We couldn't use a lot of particles in fluid, so we needed to find a way of using a really small amount of fluid and yet find a decent and entertaining gameplay. These are some early pictures from concepts that we're working on. To the left you can see a body of liquid held together by a few objects that you would be able to move around with your fingers, and this combined with being able to tilt the device, you would supposed to be to move the water from one part of the screen to another without losing any particles. And to the right you see something that's actually resembling a game from Disney. It's called Where's My Water? But this was, I think, more than a year and a half even before we saw an announcement for that game, so we knew nothing about that. But it was supposed to be roughly the same idea that you see to the left, but you would draw tunnels in the sand to let the water flow through. Even though we probably would have made it before them, I think we were quite happy we didn't go and choose that road. It wouldn't be nice to compete with Disney, I think. Let's see. Oh, this is a very early prototype of probably one of the first realized concepts of the liquid maze I just mentioned. You're supposed to move the liquid from the blue square in the top left corner to the green square in the bottom left corner. Like I mentioned before, people thought it was fun to splash around with water, but it didn't really have any actual gameplay value. It was frustrating for us to find a solution to this problem. and we were constantly experimenting on how to develop this into an actual game, but it proved to be extremely difficult. There, got all the necessary water into that. Yeah. Alright. And this is the same basic concept, different feudal attempt at a level, and we didn't really know how we could translate this into an actual game. And at every attempt we made, we felt like we were hitting a dead end. So, as you can see, this doesn't really look like much, but it's a necessary prototype to do these early concept stages. And working with this, we realized this is just not working. We need to introduce some new gameplay elements, like the deadly sensors I just mentioned before. And this is an example of this. You see the red dot? As soon as the water touches it, you lose. And this did allow for some more complex levels, certainly harder levels, but not really more entertaining levels. People were just frustrated by the challenge, and our testing crowds didn't really enjoy the challenge. So it was only at this stage, and this was several months into the project, that we actually decided to move away from the idea of having a body of liquid and replace it by this water cannon you can see on the left. However, with the limited amount of water we could use, we got a very limited ability to design levels or have an entertaining gameplay. As you can see, you're already out of particles, and this is all you could use. So it was next to impossible to make interesting levels with this concept. So we needed to find a way of increasing the liquid on screen. And our first attempt at this was to drain particles off screen. As soon as a particle would exit the screen, you could start splashing it around again. However, as soon as you would fill up an area like the bowl you see on the bottom here, those particles would not be at your disposal anymore. So it would be very confusing for players, and also equally difficult to design levels for. Our final solution to this problem was to drain particles off screen as they appeared. It is a little bit more getting into the project. It doesn't quite look like Sprinlke yet, but it's getting there. And as you can see, the particles are removed from screen successively. We wouldn't worry that people would experience this as confusing, but I think to this day we still haven't had any comments about disappearing liquid in Sprinlke. So this is just another super early experiment, but this level actually made it all the way into the game. And having nailed the basic mechanics of the game, only now did we decide that it would be time to work on an actual reason to play the game, a story behind it, an objective, a task to complete. So we decided that we would be some kind of a weird alien fireman, and being able to move the water cannon along an axis would just be the fire truck would just be an excuse to be able to do that. So introducing vulnerable huts and a puzzle of some sort that you would be able to spray around with your cannon is the actual gameplay idea. Now, with this formula, we will be able to do pretty good level design. We introduced new objects like dynamic objects that you could spray around using the water. We introduced objects that you can move around with your fingers. And we also introduced animated objects such as elevators, rotors, things like this. This is just an early concept of the fire truck. Like I said, we needed to explain how you could move the nozzle in a vertical axis, and this is just a means to do so. And the actual characters in the game were designed as tiny little blips of graphics, since we only see them as basically 16 by 16 pixels on a mobile phone, which is next to indistinguishable, so it had to be really simple, and only later did we decide to translate this into more high-resolution graphics that you see above. This is a prototype from a few more months into the project where we actually have all the necessary gameplay elements in place. So essentially, this is a Sprinlke, just without all the polish, without all the finished levels, with all the necessary components in place. And at this point, from the game testing, play testing we did, we could really see that we were onto something. So, playtesting. That was something that proved to be extremely important throughout the whole project. Probably even more so than we initially thought. And it was a constant reevaluation of our ideas. And however, we really realized that the most difficult thing with the entire game was for people to understand how to play the game and how to control the actual fire hydrant in the game, or the fire truck, I mean. Because with a casual crowd, they need to be able to learn how to play the entire game within just a few minutes before they get bored, and at the same time have the sensitivity and controls in order for them to play really complex puzzles. And having decided to do a game completely without text, essentially, everything that we introduced, the unlocking mechanism, the score system, everything, we had a fairly good idea at the time that we wanted to do, but everything that was even the slightest bit complicated we had to scrap, because people simply couldn't understand it without reading instructions on how to play. So everything had to be as simple as we possibly could make it. And this also meant that the learning curve had to be really flat. People, they needed to learn it quickly, however you couldn't have a steeply increased difficulty. And again, the target audience being casual gamers, it has to be simple, easy to learn, yet quickly challenging. And the way we try to get more experienced players to stay interested is to have a score system that reflected this. And we could have a low point of score available for each level and a high score. And this was all controlled by the number of particles that we would allow the player to use per level. It was simply a matter of changing variables when all the levels were available. Dennis.
Right, so a quick word on the technology also. I assume most of you here are developers. Sprinlke was designed around a collection of framework classes that I've been using for years before the project, and it's not built on like an in-house or an off-the-shelf engine like Unity or Cocos 2D or these more common engines. So it's all mostly written all by us. We do use some standard libraries like Box 2D for the rigid body physics. We use Vorbis for sound compression and stuff like that. But it's not like an engine or a framework that we're using. You just plug in little libraries where we lack features. And the reason for us to choose this path was mostly because we had a performance goal on running on 60 frames per second on mid-range hardware. So we knew we were gonna run into some tricky performance optimization problems. And using an off-the-shelf engine can be pretty tricky. If you hit the wall with performance, it's really hard to either need to go in and rewrite the whole engine or rely on a support team to do that. So I think it was a pretty wise decision, even though it's a lot more work, of course, to write everything yourself. The game was also designed for multiple platforms, even though we only intended to release the game on iOS at first. We wrote the whole game for Mac and PC, which we used for development. It's pretty good to do have a multi-platform approach, even though you're only intending to release on one platform, because when you compile the code, you typically find these really hard bugs if you use a few different compilers. Running the game on PC and Mac also allowed us to do all the level editing in the game itself. So you can just, when you play a level, you can just press a button and go into editing mode and tweak settings and parameters for the level. Each level is done using drawing polygons, just vector graphics for the blocking elements of the level. We use this until the whole level is complete with tweaking and everything, and then Henrik draws a background image in Photoshop. And after that, it's of course really hard to do any further editing, so it's important to do all that before the background is drawn. The reason we also supported Android was mostly because I have a lot of former colleagues working for NVIDIA, and one evening I sent them this video. Even though it doesn't look like much, it got sent around within NVIDIA, and they kind of triggered on doing something with this. They were looking for content they were just about to release a new mobile chip called Tegra 2, which got pretty popular. And they were looking for games to showcase their new hardware. And Sprinlke was kind of good because it uses a lot of CPU and GPU power, so it makes a difference from to run it on a powerful device as compared to a lower-end device. So on Android, we decided to launch. It was pretty far into the project. It was maybe April or May, so it was maybe 6 months into the project of a total of 9 months. So it was towards the end. We decided to support only Android 2.3, even though the kind of baseline for devices at that time was Android 2.2. So we knew we were going to miss out on about 50% of the market by supporting only Android 2.3. But the compatibility of the devices, and also having some kind of, by supporting only 2.3, we knew that we were going to get only the newer devices, which is good because it filters out the lower end devices. So it is also much easier to port to 2.3 because you don't have to write any wrapper layer in Java. You can keep everything in C++. So it was maybe mostly because we're lazy, but also put a barrier to the lower end devices, which was kind of good for us, because otherwise we could have gotten a lot of bad reviews from low performance devices. The port itself was pretty straightforward. The most issues we had was with sound and the aspect ratio. We used OpenAL for sound on iOS, and that's not available on Android, so we had to port the whole sound system to OpenSL, which was not completely without problems, but got there eventually. The aspect ratio, since the game was designed for iPad, which has an aspect ratio of 4:3, and most Android devices have 16:10 or even 16:9 aspect ratio, and on top of that they have the taskbar at the bottom also taking away some usable screen space, so the resulting window area you can use in the game is actually very, very wide compared to iPad. Since we were quite far into the project, we had a lot of levels already. We didn't want to remake all the levels. We didn't want to redraw all the backgrounds and all that. We knew we were going to have to find some solution. Just black box or letterbox the problem is not a good way. So what we came up with was a combination of different tricks. We used some stretching. First, if you stretch too much, it gets very noticeable, of course. So we stretch about 10%. If you stretch more, you tend to see like round objects being oval and things like that. So if the screen is wider than what we can stretch, we basically zoom in the picture and crop out the top and bottom parts So we just had to make sure there was nothing essential in the levels at the very top and bottommost parts of it. And if that's also not enough, we add some black borders to the site. But I think for most devices this was enough. We can also announce today that we are working on a sequel to Sprinlke. It's not really publicly available information yet, so this is the first time we can tell anyone about it. And it's going to be based around the same theme, same setting. The game itself is going to be with a 3D rendering. You're going to have a movable fire truck, so you're actually driving around the landscape and putting out fires. We're hoping to release this during spring next year. So it's in the pipeline right now. And that's it for us. So I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, if I'm on.
I think the microphone. Someone.
Yeah, thank you guys. I think you're doing very great things.
Thanks a lot. Great presentation, especially on Android porting, which is always essential, especially for the guys who start on iOS. And several questions. How do you do the playtesting? Because that's the part that is very important, and some people miss that or do that only with relatives or with fellow developers. How did you do that, and how long did it take? How many iterations did you have after the playtesting? First question.
Well, I think one of the most critical aspects of playtesting is see how people do it when they play the game for the first time. So once you test it on someone, you can't really, well, you can go back, but you all constantly need to find new people. And I know some people, they try to find playtesters over the internet by setting up beta versions, etc. But it's not the same thing, because you want to see how the person reacts by playing the game. So you really have to stand looking over the shoulder, not saying anything, not giving any instructions. But other than that, finding people, there's just random people all over, friends of friends, family, whoever you can find. Everything is better than trying to do some like a systematic thing over the internet, or new people, I think, is the most important thing. And not giving them any instructions, even if you really want to.
But how many did you do?
I don't think we ever counted. Sometimes we threw parties and just ask people to bring their friends, and give them something to eat and drink, maybe. That kind of helped. But I don't.
At least 100.
At least 100, yeah. Probably more than 100. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but we were a really small team. We were just 2 people, so that's what we could do. But it kind of worked for us, and I just that way of doing it. And I heard other people, other game developers, they've been like going around on the town and stopping people in the street, asking them to play their game. Now we didn't really do that, but I think maybe if you do that, people get nervous. But but yeah, I agree. Playtesting is extremely important.
We actually invite students from tech universities to participate in playtests. It's a great way to do it, because they are interested in how the games are done, and in the meantime they are actually focus group, great target audience, because they play games and they are interested. But yes, keeping silent is the key.
Right, but you gotta test the game also. If you're gonna do a casual game, you gotta try on casual people too, not only tech people. So if your mother knows how to play the game, then you really got a good thing going, I think.
And my second question is, do you license the technology of working with fluids for mobile games? First question. Second, how did you do with the Where's My Water? How did it feel? And because the prototypes that you showed are so much like the Where's My Water levels, even in the concepts and how it is done. What was the relation with that game?
Where's My Water came out, I think, 1 or 2 months after Sprinlke, and it was probably developed in parallel, both of the games, and we didn't know about each other, so it was more of a coincidence, I think. In Where's My Water is a massively popular game. So in retrospect, maybe we should have chosen that, but then we would have had the competition of Disney, of course. So it's hard to say. I think it turned out pretty well in the end. And I think we're both happy that we chose to do more of. Where's My Water is more of a puzzle game, and Sprinlke is maybe more of an action game of sorts. And for the first question about licensing, we don't license any technology. It's not really a wrapped up SDK or anything, so it's not really possible to do any licensing at the moment, at least.
Okay, one more question.
Hello, Ivan Kondrativ from Rock and Glory Studio. Where do you find funding for your game?
We worked part-time during the whole project, actually, so we worked 50% with other contract work, and then we did the game on the rest of the time. So it was self-funded completely. We actually did find a partner towards the end of the project in Stockholm that helped us with marketing, and they got like a revenue share kickback from that. But it was very small. All the development cost we just did on our spare time, mostly.
And how did you promote your application when it's come out?
This is where the company in Stockholm called Fabrication Games, that they were later acquired by King.com, so they don't really exist anymore, but they helped us with marketing. They had a lot of connections with Apple, and we hired a PR firm in the US that helped us with press releases and sending the game out to the press and all that. So it didn't just like happen virally. It was kind of a planned release in that sense. So at that point, we took the game more seriously than we did in the beginning, because we knew we had something that could be popular. So we hired this other company to do the marketing for us, basically.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, one more, probably.
Hi guys, and what was the marketing budget for this? And can you tell one more time what was the company for Fabrication Games and what the website?
Fabrication Games, yes, they don't exist anymore, so no need to check them up. But the marketing budget, I think they helped us a little bit with their time and giving us some advice, but mostly it was the cost of hiring the PR firm in the US, which I think was $15,000, and that was basically it for the release. But the worth mentioning is that the connections with Apple and Google is by far the most important contacts for.
Thank you. And how many downloads do you have?
So far we had about 6 million, but that also includes the free download, the free version. During launch weekend, we had 100,000 sales, and in the first, I think we reached 250,000 maybe the first week or something. So it was a really successful launch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.